I have some great books to share with you today. Hey there, it's Mitzi. Welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk to you about the books that I've been reading this past week. I finished up 3 books. I'm still reading a couple of books that are going to take me a little longer, but I finished up 3 books that were great. I had the best reading week. These were some really good books, and they're all different types of books, and I'm excited to talk to you about them today. So the 3 books I'm going to talk to you about are not in any particular order. They're all fantastic, but they're all different type books, and I love them for different reasons. And so as we go along, I'll tell you the reasons why I loved each one. The first one that I finished was Magic for Marigold by Lucy Maud Montgomery. This one was published in 1929, and it showcases Montgomery's strengths in writing. For me, this really shows her strengths as a writer with her interesting characters, her beautiful descriptions of the setting, the surroundings, the forest, all those type things that I love about Lucy Maud Montgomery. And so I really enjoyed this one. I've been trying to read through all of the standalones, and this was my final read for the standalones. So maybe soon I can kind of rank the ones that I've read, because I talk about them a lot on my channel as I go. But I love this one because it's about a young girl named Marigold. It's kind of a coming of age story. Well, I guess it is a coming of age story, because it starts when Marigold is born and goes through her childhood and all the things that she experiences. And she experiences, you know, heartache and joy and all the feelings, and learns along the way. So I would consider this more of a coming of age story. And it is a children's book, but I read it as an adult and I loved it. I think Lucy Maud Montgomery writes a lot of books that are timeless. They are books that you can enjoy, you know, as a middle grader all the way up, and you can still enjoy it as an adult no matter what age you are. So I love that for her books, because you can just pick these up and reread them again and again, and you never get tired of them. I do love Marigold because she is similar to Anne Shirley in Anne of Green Gables. Now, Anne Shirley, you're not going to beat Anne Shirley, but this one is similar to that. As you go through the story, there's a lot of every chapter is like a little vignette in her life. It's just little incidences along the way, just simple living, heartwarming stories. There are a lot of things that Marigold does when she's a small child. She misunderstands things, and that makes it funny, because it's like, I remember, you know, as a child, you hear someone say something and you take it the wrong way, and you think this is going to happen or whatever, you know, you blow things out of proportion. And a lot of that happens in here when she's a small child. There's one scene, one of my favorite scenes is when she goes to stay with some relatives. She spends the night with them, and what happens while she's away, you know, she's really excited about going on to spend the night with the relatives, and then she's ready to come home in the middle of the night. It was really and then there's a twist in it at the end of that chapter that was really fun too. There's a lot of that in here, all kinds of twists and turns. I really don't know how to describe this, except that it has that nostalgic feeling of simple living and, you know, a simple childhood growing up with eccentric people. And that's what one of the things I love about Montgomery too, is all of the characters are quirky, different, and the things that they say, their little sayings, are just funny. Another thing I want to mention is Magic for Marigold, the title, because it is magical, not in, you know, there's not any magic. This is realistic fiction. But in her mind, you know, her imagination is magical as she, you know, explores the forest and the trees and the flowers and all those things. She has an imaginary friend, and she lives in her imagination, a lot like Anne Shirley, which I love. She's that kind of child. She's very creative, and, you know, she lets her imagination run wild. So there is a magical element to that imagination and creativity. And I love that about it, because, you know, as a child, I was the same way. I would play pretend, and, you know, we would have all these magical things happen, you know, in my own backyard. And so I love that about it. That's one of the things that is most memorable about the story, and one of the things I think, again, is a strength of Montgomery's writing, because she certainly has such a connection with how children, you know, have these imaginations, and how sometimes it'll get the best of them, and how they will, you know, exaggerate things as they're trying to come to terms with growing up and all the emotions and things that they deal with as they grow up. So I really did enjoy this one. There's a lot of fun. Like I said, it's a lot of, it's almost like short stories through Marigold's life, and I really like that about it. So I highly recommend Magic for Marigold, and I'm so glad that I picked this one up this week. I also wanted to mention that I'm going to pick up Emily of New Moon by Lucy Maud Montgomery next. I have been trying to focus on the standalones, and I've been reading a lot of the short stories too, so I haven't picked up any more series. This one I'm going to pick up though, because I had said at the beginning of the year I would use it for the Serious About Series challenge, and Elizabeth over at Lizzie Faye Loves Books, she's hosting that challenge. She hosts it, I think, every year, and she's using sort of the number 3 as a theme, because it's 2023. So for this year, there's a lot of read trilogies or read 3 from a series. And since Emily of New Moon is a trilogy, I wanted to read this whole series, but I have not even picked one up yet. I have plenty of time because they're not that long, and I think they're more of a middle grade feel to them. So I don't think this will be too complicated and too difficult to get through. I'm excited about this though, and I'm going to try to read this whole trilogy before the end of the year. So I wanted to mention that as my next Lucy Maud Montgomery read. So the next book I read was a wonderful surprise. It's called The Children of Noisy Village by Astrid Lindgren. Now, Astrid Lindgren is famous for the Pippi Longstocking series. If you're familiar with that, you probably are. You probably read that as a child too. That is a wonderful series, and I really enjoy that series. And somehow this came up in my feed, so I picked it up because I thought I loved the cover. It looked like something that I would enjoy, because it was written in I think it was 1947. Let me check on that. Yeah, it was written in 1947, and I had a feeling I would love it, especially since it's written by Astrid Lindgren. And I thought, yeah, this is my kind of book. So I picked it up, and I'm so glad I did. It's super short, but it's about these children living in what they call Noisy Village. And it's 3 farms that are right there together. And I also, after I finished it, found out that Astrid's father really did live in the middle farm. And so there's these 3 farms, and he lived in the middle one. So it's really about his childhood, I assume. So that made it even better. But these are just simple little episodes in these children's lives who live in these 3 farms. And there's these, you know, several children, and they go fishing and climb trees and all those fun things. I loved it because it reminded me of my own childhood. The simplicity of being able to just wander around and play with the neighborhood children and figure out things to do along the way. That's the kind of book it is. And I found it to be wonderful. I just loved it. And there are a couple of other books. I think there's several books actually. I think there's like a spring and a Christmas too, but I think there's 3 books in this series, and then a couple of holiday books, and I want to read all of them, so I'm going to try to find them. Again, this is a translated work. I don't know if I said that. She was a Swedish writer, and so I have to find them written in English. But, oh, and that was another thing. I could use this for a translated work on my summer book bingo. So I was excited about that too, because it is a translated work. That is one thing I want to mention too about the book. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. But it was a little clunky in places because of the translation. I'm assuming that's why it feels that way. And it's not that big of a deal to me, because it was usually when they were transitioning to the next chapter, it would be something like, let me tell you about this, or let me tell you about the Christmas we had. So it wasn't a very good transition into the next chapter. But I don't think that was the author's fault. I really think that that might be in translation. But so I kind of am a little more lenient on the writing style in these books, because when you translate something, it's not going to come across the same way, not have the same flow to the story, that kind of thing. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was a 5-star read, and I want to read this whole series now because it reminds me so much of books that I would have loved as a child and my own childhood. There are places, Lisa is the main child that narrates the story. And there's a couple places where she has her birthday, she gets a new room, and everything that they did. There's one place where they decide to put this bucket up between the houses on a string so that they can relay messages to one another. And I remember doing things like that as a kid. So I just loved it because it, again, it just brings back so many of my own childhood memories, but just a fun one that I think that's a timeless story. These little episodes are things I think kids would be interested in today. So I highly recommend this for middle grade and adults as well, because it was fantastic, and I look forward to reading the next one. So then the last book I read this week was also fantastic. I know I keep saying fantastic and wonderful, but this was such a wonderful week of reading. I read such a variety of books, and they all were great in their own way. But this one's called The Book of Lost Names by Kristen Harmel. This was published in, I think, 2020. And I checked this out from the library because I wanted to use this to fulfill the prompt on Summer Book Bingo, a friend recommendation. So I first want to say thank you, because a couple of you have mentioned this book to me, so that's why I used it. And so I had put a hold on it at the library, and then I was able to pick this up this week. And thank you, because this was great. It's a great example of World War II historical fiction. This is what you should do when you are writing for World War II historical fiction, because it has a different premise to it and is told in a simple way. And at the same time, even though it's told in a simple way, at the same time, it shares the complexity of the war itself. And what I mean by that is, this story is about a girl, she's a young girl who is living in Paris, and her father is captured. They're a Jewish family. Her father is captured, so to save herself and her mother, she forges papers to get them out of the city. And so they, of course, have different names and a different identity. Well, she's so good at the forgery that this priest asked her to help him smuggle out children by forging papers for them. So she starts working for the French Resistance and this Catholic priest, and they start forging papers to smuggle these children out to safety. And that was a fantastic premise, and it was super interesting. But the thing that I loved the most about the story was it, was a basic kind of story. It didn't go into dramatic things about, the horrific details of World War II, which are important. I'm not trying to say they're not important, but that was just not what she chose to do in this particular book. She chose to talk about the identity of these children, because it's called The Book of Names, because she decided to create a secret book that's like a code. And she took this ancient religious text, a book that most people wouldn't even pick up, and she started coding out using the text in the book to identify all the children that were being smuggled out, so that after the war they could have their real identities saved and find their families. So it was super interesting for that reason. And in this, there is a dual timeline, but it stays mainly in the 1940s during World War II. It starts out with the main character. She's an older lady working in a library, which of course that was great too, because books, there's a lot about books in this woven into it. So I loved that. And she sees this Book of Lost Names show up in a newspaper article. So she decides to go to Germany to, claim her book, because this is the book that she created during the war. And then it goes back in time and talks about how the book came to be. So I found that to be interesting. And what was fantastic, though, what I mean by the complexity of it, was it showed a part of the war that we don't think about as much. Because, like, there's parts where, and I've seen this in other historical fiction about World War II, where they would go back to their apartment and somebody was already living in it because they didn't think they would be coming back. You know, they were getting rid of all the Jewish people who lived there. So not only were they murdering these people, which of course is the most horrible part, but they were just moving into their houses and taking all their stuff. And so that's a horrible part of it. But I think this dealt with the most tragic part was their identity was stolen. All these people were, you know, sent to these concentration camps and given numbers. And so their identity were stolen. And this talks a lot about her. She falls in love with a Catholic man in the story. And so there's the whole identity of her heritage, the struggle of, you know, keeping her faith and falling in love with somebody who wasn't of her faith, and also the relationship of her with the Catholic priest as a Jewish woman. So there's a lot about heritage and religion in this, not in whether it's right or wrong, I'm not saying that, but just who you are as a person and your identity and your faith and all of those things, how this war stripped all these people and robbed them of that. So that's why I found this to be such a memorable book and a complex book for World War II. So if you were looking for a great historical fiction book, I highly recommend this, because I am still thinking about, I mean, I just read it this week, but I'm sure I'll continue thinking about that part that she wanted to convey, the message she wanted to convey of the tragedy of these people losing their homes, losing their families, losing, you know, most of them were losing their lives and being sent away to these camps. And the ones that did survive and were smuggled out as children, you know, some of these kids were toddlers, babies. They didn't have any recollection of their families who lost their lives in this war. So I can imagine the struggles as they grew and trying to figure out who they are, when there's not even any record of that. So that's why I found this to be such a great historical fiction for World War II. So if you like historical fiction, and even if you're tired of World War II books, because I know people think it's too saturated in the market, but this one was definitely one that I will be recommending. So thank you to the ones of you who recommended it to me. So those are the books that I read this week. What have you been reading? I hope you're having a fantastic reading week too. Let me know in the comments so we can chat there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.